Airing first on Asheville FM, WSFM LP at 103.3 FM in Asheville, North Carolina. This is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions, comments, or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you're interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment of the show, you're free to do so. Just send us an email if you end up using any content. If you care to, you can send us letters at our new address, which is The Final Straw Radio, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina 28816. The show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop.
You're listening to the second half of my interview with anarchist activist and author Cindy Milstein as they toured with the book Rebellious Mourning, The Collective Work of Grief, published last year by AK Press. In this portion of the conversation, Cindy will share about community support, infrastructures in sickness and in health, the importance of play, the Montreal student strikes, insights from Sylvia Federici, care circles in religious institutions, anarchism, and more. The first half of this chat can be found at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org and really should be listened to before you listen to this. It makes a lot more sense. If you want to find more work by Cindy, you can check out their blog at cbmilstein.wordpress.com. And you can also find many of the books that they've worked on at akpress.org and writings up at anarchiststudies.org. If you care to support the Final Straw Radio, please consider a one-time donation via our PayPal, or recurring donation via our Patreon or LibrePay. We have items on the Patreon and in our Big Cartel web store to thank supporters, including stickers, buttons, t-shirts, and zines. Great timing for the socially required gift-giving holiday season. We never charge for our audio work, so if you feel like you can kick something back cash-wise our way, we really appreciate it. Find out more at our website by clicking the support button.
More and more, I'm like, how do we cultivate spaces where we're thinking to be around each other more so we can see the whole of our lives in multi-generational spaces, and we have structures of care that allow for both the transience and the disbursement of what's happening to us, whether we choose to do it or we're forced to do it. Because as a Jew, I take that really seriously. Israel was not the solution to the question of how do you maintain community against forces that want to kill you. There was a different answer.
Places, there were kibbutzes before, right?
Or like Rojava to me is such a beautiful. I mean, and I knew Barry Bookchin, so I really feel great that there's plenty of critiques I have his ideas, and I love him and feel indebted to him. Or I hate that word, indebted. Oh, okay, a capitalist term. He would hate that I said that too, because he was always like, "Why does our language get destroyed?" I feel grateful. Or another word. But I so love that. I don't love that Öcalan, who was an authoritarian Marxist-Leninist leader of the Kurds, got put in jail. But in jail, reading Bookchin and also reading other theorists, and him coming to the point is like, oh, these liberation struggles have just tried to create a new state. That's not. We need to create self-governance and self-determination, and it needs to be feminist. And that was actually because Öcalan had, I think it's because I'm just guessing, but there was a co-leadership structure from the very beginning. And there's a woman whose name I can't remember, which feels awful. And she was one of the two. The two of them were the two key figures. She was actually assassinated a few years ago in Paris. She's a forgotten part of the story of Rojava. You're like, where did feminism come from? I think probably from her. And she's
a nice old man with a mustache.
Yeah. But I mean, there's a really good film. I think it's called The Woman of Rojava that looks at her for about the first hour and then talks about her, how influential she was. Totally. And I can't even remember her name, which is so awful.
I'll put it in the show notes.
Okay. But it's really striking because you're like, it isn't accidental. But so Rojava, they're also thinking deeply about structures of care. What we look at and go, oh, women with guns. Well, sure, they're fighting because they're in a war zone, and they're like also fighting in ways where they want to take care of each other better. They're not just trying to be, oh, cool, romanticize women with guns. They're like, we're doing this because when we're in militias with men, they hurt. There's patriarchy, and they hurt us or rape us or are abusive toward us. So we don't want to do that while we're also trying to fight ISIS, who's hurting other women. But then I've been so struck by within Rojava of taking seriously, like, we don't want to replicate a state. We want to try to create a community of care that doesn't look like a state, and it's an experiment, and it's horrible in certain ways and lovely in certain ways. And that's, to me, the remarkable story of Rojava, whatever, maintaining that in the middle of a war zone. And, I wish there was more translated from people that are actually there. But some of the structures that really move me of that are women going, we have pretty patriarchal society and our bodies are used in ways we don't want to. So a big outburst of women creating women's houses. And again, we can problematize. They need to maybe think about queer theory a little more within Rojava movement. But far be it for me to go in there and say, okay, I'm sure that's happening in ways, but that hasn't been a strength maybe of that. But creating women's houses for, and they're like, anyone can come here they want to, and they're self-managed, and they're solidarity, not charity. And when women are being hurt at home, they can come here, but we also put out newspapers through them. We have reading groups, and we, help people after the trauma of fighting in militias, and we have different structures of healthcare, and we have different structures of schooling, and we have different structures of childcare, and and so the only way we're going to do that is we prefigure all those institutions at once when we have autonomous territory that's our own. And so Rojava and Zapatistas and others experiments are these grand experiments we can look to and go, they're so far away. There are these huge things. We can't replicate them, which we can't and we shouldn't. But I think we can come back to where we are and say, here's our little, our little community, which is Asheville, and it's not that little because it's everything to us. And while we're here, how can we think about what do we need for the infrastructure? And we need a bookstore, and we need an event space, and we need a radio station, and we need a printing press, and maybe we need a community health clinic, and maybe we need regular ways to process what we're going through, and maybe we need community dinners every week. And if we get together every week, we won't even have to be surprised that people have births and deaths and changes in life, because we'll just be checking in with each other regularly, and and not have them be this instrumental thing where we're like, we're only meeting because we need to get something done, but we're meeting just to be like, hey, how's life going? And play games a lot to do things where we can laugh and joke. And I'm really struck by the power of games lately. People can talk about really hard topics. And all of you who are game designers out there, I really love the Block by Block, and there's an anti-fascist game, but a lot of the games are like cooperative games to figure out how to resist things we don't like. And a friend of mine, I hope, out of anarchist summer school, I was like, why don't we do a game where we figure out how to develop social relationships so we don't lose all the care and the self-organized spaces in our community? So they are working on that project. I hope it actually becomes a game.
Something like the opposite of The Village, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know The Village. What is it?
Werewolves.
Oh yeah. Yes, I have played that.
Instead of absolutely distrusting everyone that's around.
Yeah.
Who's trying to kill me?
Yeah. No, but some game where, for instance, because we played this game where the FBI agents are trying to break down a collective, and we had such good conversations about wow, our entire collective is so at risk at being broken down by the FBI because they understand where we all have weaknesses.
Like power dynamics.
Yeah, like me, I'm a talker and I'm a connector. I always you should meet this person, and I don't care what you do with that, but I know you two would like each other, or blah blah. And that's just a function, and so that was one of the functions in the game. And they were like, that's a good thing and a bad thing. That's my weakness, because they know if if you want to network, okay, if you want to figure out who the network is, who do you go to? So each of us has a weakness. After we played that game, I was like, hey, the opposite. We should do a game where we're a collective and we have 4 really solid projects in our community, and then we get these cards that, whatever, I don't know how to design games. It's a cooperative game where, the rent went up on 2 of the spaces. What are you going to do? Or someone's been sexually assaulted, or someone said the wrong pronoun, or all these things that come up, or someone had a death, or whatever, all these things, and different choices about how you deal with that. And if you deal with them with solidarity and care and love and grappling with the whole of our lives, you end up with 8 spaces. And if you don't, you end up with none. Or something. But it actually, because I think the conversations we have, none of us know how to do this, So I don't know. I just think there's so many ways, and I don't have all the answers, but I've been really struck on. I was part of I stayed in Montreal during the Montreal student and social strike of 2012 for about 4 of the 6 months, and some of the key organizers of that, because it was absurdly beautiful. The whole entire social fabric changed. In French, to strike means also, if you take out one letter, to dream, and everyone was like, we are not striking to stop things. We're stopping what we don't like to dream about what we want, and everybody dreaming for them meant doing the dreams in the street in front of each other. It was absurdly romantic and beautiful. I can't even explain it. I felt like it was if I had been part of the Zapatista or Rojava, and it was messy, and there was a whole mistakes, and so one of the things that came out of it for some of the people was we could have cared for each other better. We didn't, and afterward it was really hard, because when it ended, it was really hard, and nobody really talked about how hard it was, and everyone that went through that experience got really depressed and made a lot of bad choices about them, and became isolated. And so this group that came out of that in Montreal now and they came out of it, they've done some writings about it, they maybe have some zines about it and interviews, and they've also created spaces for people just to get together and hang out. And I think they did in the summer like a picnic, a care picnic or something, but it was like playing games and cooking for each other and having conversations about how we take care of each other. But they really took seriously the challenge. Like, that didn't work well during and after in ways, So how do we have these things that are contiguous, that go through, that we see, oh, here's how we're not doing it? And I thought that was another way, So I'm just trying to think of examples because I think in a way we're just at the beginning of trying to imagine it. Sylvia Federici, who I'm, friendly acquaintances with, she's such a, there's very few people who write and you meet them and you're like, they're just as wonderful in person as they are. I mean, I'm sure we all have our faults and quirks and eccentricities. But I've been struck by almost every time I've seen her of late, and we start talking as people who are getting older as radicals, and she believes in common and feminist care, and she's like, we need to figure out ways to create, communities of care for people who are aging. And she has a beautiful essay on elder care in her Revolution at Point Zero, I think is the name of it. Beautiful essay everyone should read, where she talks about this isn't something that's just going to happen to people at ages. It's this idea that bodies are disposable in our society, and elder care has become a huge commodification, and it's also part of all our social isolation, that we don't have these fabrics that take care of each other through the whole of our life. It's a really good essay to provoke us to think about. We don't have the capacity. We are so far. So what would that look like without it being these also insular things that are just sort of taking care of our own? Yeah. And I said this last night as an example, but I just really think we need to integrate this into everything we do. And I keep using this as an example, and I've used it on every podcast I've done, but I'll use it again because I think it's really, I think there's very few examples of it, but the movement PAH in Spain, which is an anti-eviction movement, and there's a film called Si Se Puede, 7 Days in the Life of PAH, and they sort of have 7 pillars, and that movement was tens of or hundreds of thousands of people through direct action. Their slogan was, no one will not have a home. They did not let people get evicted and just go onto the street. And so the 7 pillars of what made that movement so huge. And I've been part of solidarity, not charity, anti-eviction struggles especially in the Bay Area, where eviction was part of the eviction crisis, having to leave a place I wanted to stay. And but we never managed to get more than at the height, maybe a couple hundred people doing these things. And I think also because we didn't see it as crucial to have these different pillars in a way. So the pillars, there's other reasons why probably, but one of the pillars was, we will stand between the landlord and the thing when people are getting evicted. Another was we'll take over buildings and squat them and create housing for people. And property laws allow them to do that for longer than here, so it's not just that we haven't thought of that here. And another was assemblies every week where people talked about strategy and what was going well and what wasn't. And another was every week people gathered together to talk about the feelings that were coming up. All the feelings that were coming up about losing homes and fighting together and struggling together, losing political struggles. And in the film, it's really lovely. And I watched it a long time ago, so I probably misquoted this repetitively. But my sense of watching it and memory of it was that you see someone who's lost their home, who she said, I wish I'd known about this movement beforehand, but I found out through this group where you could come and talk about how it felt. And she goes, I really needed to talk to people afterward. And she goes, and through that, I found out, wow, people are breaking into buildings and creating housing. And so she got involved in the direct action part of the movement. And there's someone sitting in a squad who's, I think, in the movie, a parent, and saying, I have this home. I'm not on the street. I would have been, but it still isn't my home. I didn't choose to leave my house. And she goes, and through this political organizing, I found, and through being part of squats, I found this group where I could talk about that. And so they're not separate, and this, I really like where we think about, okay, we need all those. We need direct action to shut things down we don't like. We need direct action to open up what we want instead. And we need to be human at every moment with each other and create space to process politically and personally what's happening to us. And anarchists, we seem uniquely bad at doing that. I've seen a lot of anarchists this year and been really struck by this, returning and turning to religion or faith. And faith, I have turned dramatically back toward key categories for me in Judaism that aren't about, for me, at all religion. They're about cultural and traditional things that are bound up in the religion. I mean, there are a lot of Jewish anarchists, and it's, to me, not a coincidence based on some of the teachings or some of the thought processes or cultural practices. But because there's a rise of anti-Semitism, and a lot of us have been, when we get together, I would say, a young person who's Jewish that did this to me, and an anarchist said, I can't be an anarchist or an anti-Zionist in Jewish spaces, and when I'm in anarchist spaces, I can't be Jewish. And yet there's fascists, and my grandparents were part of all of us have grandparents or parents, or we're all very close to genocide that happened, and to displacement, and to other categories. And so we were like, we also think we might have some experiences to offer in terms of being able to talk about this. So I think why we're all talking to each other as Jews has meaning at this moment. But I've also noticed so many people, Muslims and Christians and Unitarians and all Buddhists, I've seen a lot of anarchists turning to it. And I was at one place about a week ago, and almost everybody in the room had gone back, half of them had gone back to going to church. And they said, the reason in the small town we're going back to churches is because they offer a structure for all the changes in life. And you go there, and in the room there's everybody from all, and they're Unitarian and things like that. But they said, I feel like if I stay in the anarchist world, one of them was a person who's in their 40s, I think, I'll just guess, I don't know. And they said, I want to go through a place that I know when I die, there'll be people there to support the people after me, and I want to have a place where I can go through. I was so struck by, and they said, and I'm making it my own. None of them are going unthinkingly to it. And other people are turning back to traditions within those things and making them their own. Not maybe going to churches or synagogues or temples or mosques, but bringing those practices. And they do really, most religious practices have coming of age ceremonies, they have birth acknowledgments, and death acknowledgments, weddings, all the things that happen to us, and they have visual spaces in them. They have teachings about them. They have discussion support groups. It's like, and then we're like, organized religion, which, I don't, anything that's hierarchical, I'm like, anything that's hierarchical domination, we need to be suspicious of, including in our own circles, and either try to transform them or step away. But I think our sort of them, I always walk around and go, God, if we actually took over space again, if there weren't an organized religion, they have a lot of cool buildings that would, and what would we do in them? But why don't those spaces always intrigue me? I love walking into them in a certain way, all of different faiths, because I'm like, I wish we had spaces like this where we had a place I could just walk into and I'm having a hard time and sit down and just pause and look at beauty and light some candles.
And maybe there's someone to talk to there who's like there to be ready to talk to you.
Right, which is like kind of a library. I hadn't thought about that. I love libraries because you can walk in and you can just be like, I have a strange question.
Start bugging librarians. Just be like, I just had a loss in my family.
But actually, I have friends that are librarians, and almost all of them, pretty much all of them, say 50% of their time is that they're a therapist and a social worker. Everyone I know that does places that are about being in public space are telling me now that 50% of what they do, you do an anarchist bookstore, 50%, and that happened at Firestorm yesterday. I walked in, the first thing I walked in, and I was like, I need to use the bathroom, and I came out, and there was someone's right next to the bathroom saying, this is the first time I've come in, and I could tell they were having a hard life, and they were start talking about, I just found the space for these reasons. They start telling me their whole life story, because they're having a really hard time. So why did they think a bookstore was some, and I'm not even part of that collective. So you're right, but there's this way in which there's someone always there instead of, which is what we do now. I think that's really, I hadn't thought about that. Now we think, when I want to know something, instead of walking into a library, and reference librarians used to be this great, you walk in and go, hey, how does the constellation, or what's the capital of this night? Like, I'll Google it. And I think we're now like, I've had this loss, I'll post it on Instagram.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
And I don't, because I need to talk to someone, And when you dialogue with someone, I think we're so bad. Like, it's been really intriguing to me. There's a zine series called The Worst. I really recommend it. It's not in a downloadable PDF, which it should. Someone do that out there. But you can see the pages screenshot, and each one is a compilation of radicals writing about the worst happens, now what? And some of them are so poignant and sad and you make you cry, and others are funny. And there was one in there, I just remember, I don't remember, they were like awful things people have said to me when I've had losses, but people do say, so for instance, I had 3 chosen and family members and biological and chosen family members die in the past few years, and the first thing everyone says, and they all died for structural reasons, capitalism, climate change, and all things I could see as political earlier than they had to. If those things weren't around, they would have lived longer. And but they were all over 80. So the first thing everyone says is, how old were they? I say, oh, my chosen mom died. How old was she? I was like, well, I love her.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, oh, but I mean, she was old, right? And I go, well, that actually, honestly, that makes it harder because, like, I've known her my entire life. Like, maybe it doesn't make it harder. I don't know. I don't know what it's like to lose a child. That probably is just as hard. How would I know? But, so even when I do that, I'm already assuming something that and it's not that people are bad people. And then I realize, wow, I've said that a lot of times to people, in the past. When someone said, oh, my grandpa died. Oh, how old was he? You loved him. Like, that's why you're grieving. So I don't think we're bad people. But I think partially that phone thing where if I walked in and I said to someone and I had a chance to dialogue, I could say, but I love them. And every time I've said that, now people go, oh, yeah, wow. And I go, yeah, I know that. I know it's so hard to have language for what happens when we lose people. And I don't say it in a, way. But I think the loss of dialogue is we don't have a chance to get past that one moment. So on Facebook, people write, how old were they? And you can't, what do you do on Facebook?
Look it up.
Yeah, right, yeah. So, yeah, right, exactly. So, yeah. No, I know, there's something to be lost. I hadn't thought about that with most religious. You can just walk in and there's someone you can talk about relationship problems with. You can talk about, your children are acting up. You can talk about eviction, and why did this have to be this hierarchical figure that's a priest or whatever.
And they're also like spaces where frequently like a distribution of resources is a constantly thought of thing. If someone in the community is having a bad time. Like I dated someone who had come up Mormon, and the family wasn't Mormon at the time, but it was a single mom and 3 kids, and like the church would, like, knowing that these people weren't practicing and weren't contributing to the community, and maybe that was like there's something insidious about like, yeah, come back to us, which is also kind of beautiful. Like, come back to us, whatever. But anytime there was a, Thanksgiving or like Christmas, there would be gifts for the kids that were on the tree that were delivered by the church, collected from the community. Yeah. Or like meals cooked, like when somebody passes, or when somebody has a surgery. Yep. Like having community come together, or like there was a thing a few years back when J.E. Williams was killed here. I know some of the like white anti-racist activists who were doing solidarity with the family did a meal train for a while, as well as like there were folks like just doing general security at events because of harassment from police and whatever, like that sort of like wider thing around loss too. Yeah, no, you're right. In a way, all the infrastructure, all the things we reject, which I understand. I don't go to organized religious structures, but like we are rejecting profoundly deep mutual aid structures and that are contiguous, because a lot of anarchists are trying to do meal trains or trying to do circles of care. When I was really struck by some friends that had been targeted by fascists for the past year and a half, and death threats and all sorts of things. And they said some of their friends said to them, this is another example of anarchists thinking of care. They said to them, we're going to form a care support circle for you. And they both said, oh, we don't need it. And then they said within about 2 hours, we were like, wow, did we need, because they didn't know they needed it. And it was really beautiful. Their friends to go, you need us to like help cook you meals once a week because you're having a heart, actually point out to you how this is impacting your health, which neither of them had been seeing. You need people from the outside to reflect back. And then so one of the friends of mine, she said, oh, now I know when I think about someone being targeted by fascists now, I'm going to form a care circle, whether they need it or not. I was really struck by that. But we do that episodically. And it's just, even when she said, oh, I'd never thought about that before. And she's not a young person, right? Or things happen to us. I want to do death doula work, but only because I randomly stumbled upon that term, and and I don't want to do it individually, right? And so there aren't the structures, but churches actually do have contiguous, deep structures for that. So we've rejected so much, but not when I was thinking when you were talking, when my parents first got sick on the same day, and I went, and they were in Michigan, and I was living in
San Francisco, and I was going back and forth a lot, and then ended up just staying in Michigan. But at the time, I didn't know there were anarchists in the town I went back to, which is where I grew up. Now there are. Now I'm like, oh, I wish I knew who was there, because I met them now. But I was also like taking care of 2 people who were really sick and dying, and and I thought I was there by myself, and so, and I was so struck by, which is one reason now Michigan is my home base, is the deep level of a lot of people are Christian there, and I often do my editing work in cafes and drink coffee while I'm doing my editing work. And I was so struck in Michigan, I would do that in between taking care of my parents to catch up on my work. And every time someone would be talking about their Bible group or their church, and I'm like, where am I? In San Francisco, it's all tech bros talking about how much money they're making. I was like, okay, different culturally, I like being also, you hear what people are talking about culturally. But the number of times, and I felt so deserted and so abandoned by my anarchist world. And then, I was like, here I'm alone taking care of 2 people and helping them die well, dealing with all the shit that comes up, financial siblings that are being blah blah blah, blah blah, and cleaning out their house of whatever 3 or 4 decades, and the number of people, and I couldn't. So I do all these anarchist things. Like I blogged a lot about it. If people want to read about it, because I think that was my release, my therapy on my blog, which I should get back to someday. But at one point I I have to clean out their house because they're dying. Well, one had died and the other's about to die, and so I'm like, this is ridiculous. I asked each of my siblings if they wanted anything. Each of us wanted a tiny box of mementos, because we kind of lived in a house where you wonder why I'm an anarchist. We always dragged things home from dumpsters and found objects and so the house was just full of a lot of junk, and my dad kept every scrap of flyer from newspapers that never threw anything. They weren't hoarders, but just kind of a big Midwestern house full of just nothing. People save things in case we might need these light bulbs.
They came through the Depression, for instance.
Yeah, they did. Well, yeah, they both did. So, or they came through growing up as my dad is a kid of immigrants that, and whatever, different life stories. And they both had really abusive childhoods. So I think partially it was comfort too. But so anyway, but then I'm like, I can't. So I put aside the 4 box. I'm like, oh my God, I got this big Midwestern house that I need to empty out. And then I was like, oh, I'll do a make an offer in the house, come in the house, make an offer on things. And then within a minute of the first day, I realized this is Michigan. I mean, because it really was. Everyone came in and everyone started telling me their life story. Wow. Because people talk in the Midwest to each other. And I don't know, I tend to like listening to stories, and I don't know what it is about me. I try practicing empathy, but people often tell me, which I value, I really find beautiful. I think we should tell each other stories, so I will listen. And so people start telling me, oh, I was displaced from the Bay Area, and we loaded up our pickup truck, and we were living on it for the last year, and took our kids, and we're like, we have a cousin who lives out here in Michigan, it's where we grew up, and we're coming back, or we have nothing. And I'm like, oh, don't even make an offer. And they said, we really could use a bed. Take the bed. So I was like, okay, it's now just a free store. Yeah. And it took a week. Yeah. And so for a week, I had about 500 people coming in.
Wow.
And what was beautiful for me was it became a space of care for me, because little kids would come to me. One kid found a typewriter I had that I grew up with that my dad had won in a contest for puns, which is actually, and the kid said, could I take this typewriter because I'm learning to be a writer? And then I said, oh, that was the typewriter I learned to write on, or I thought I wanted to be a writer on. And then they were like, oh, I shouldn't take it. I go, no, thank you for reminding me. I hadn't thought of that typewriter in years. No one uses typewriters anymore. And sure, I could sell it to a vintage store, maybe make a lot of money. I was like, wow, this is making me feel so happy because you want to be a writer. I feel like I'm passing on I never wanted kids. And I'm like, this is the kids I have. For me, this is, and I was like, oh, take it. So for me, I was like reliving all these beautiful memories and touching things where people wanted to take things that they wanted to repurpose in ways that felt so beautiful to me. And so many people look to me and go, are you doing this by yourself? And I go, yeah. I'd start describing, yeah, I've got parents that literally got sick and terminally ill on the same day, and I've been here. My dad for 9 months. Took him 9 months and my mom's now, and I'm cleaning out the house, and they're like, what? And I go, yeah. And then they go, how are you? This must be really hard. And I go, yeah, it was so helpful. Yeah. And then they go, I'm coming over tomorrow and helping you clean out this part of the basement, because there's parts that no one was going to take and I go, well, thanks, and so many people, and they were all lower. It doesn't mean that Christians are the only people that do this.
Sure.
But end of long story, it really reminded me, like, oh, well, church structures, they go, well, we do this for our people in our church, and then I was like, why don't I really, and then I was getting increasingly angry. Why don't anarchists think to do this? But I think they think to do it because they're in a culture. It's not that, again, they're smarter. but it's just they're...
Or better people.
Or, yeah, no, they're not at all. I mean, and a lot of times it was also hard to be around everyone with giant crosses going, bless you, bless you. And I was like, well, I actually don't believe in God, but thank you. And I would try and kept saying it increasingly empathetic ways, or I'd go like, well, while I was doing that yard sale, as a side note, 3 or 4 times people came rushing back, or that, not yard sale, the free store in the house, which actually did get completely emptied out. Everything that I thought was I was going to even have to throw in the dump, someone wanted everything. It was weird. That's great. But a few people came to me a couple times and go, do you know in that room in the attic, I found something that's Jewish? And I go, yeah, my family's Jewish. And they go, oh. And I could clearly see like the anti-Semitism running through their head, or they'd say something that was kind of, I saw something that looked a little queer. Well, yeah, some of us are going, because it's also, that's the bad part of some of the Christianity. Yeah. But it was also nice because they were so empathetic toward me at that point that they were able to kind of go, in that way. Yeah, which was what I was like, okay, this is funny, weird and awful. Yeah. but yeah, you're right. To get back to that, I was like, maybe, we really need to rethink churches as a metaphor. I did a book called Paths Towards Utopia with my friend Eric Ruin, where with images, and he does image work and I do word work and art, and we tried to bring them together. It was an experiment of which we could make the pieces together say more together than alone. And we were trying to get at practices we do here and now. We were both obsessed with how people act when they're in parks. They act in ways that with people highly self-organize all sorts of things in parks, especially parks that are very lively, which they wouldn't do in other parts of the world. So we're trying to say, people already do these practices. They don't think about them as, they don't have to be called anarchism, but why don't you keep trying to do that in other places, And so libraries was one we used, because I think libraries are just like, they're all becoming corporate and awful too. But again, you just walk in, there's someone you can ask any questions of, people, free world of exploration, sort of free. No one thinks of taking a book, you bring it back. All these things that are different structures of social relationships. But I hadn't thought of churches, and now more and more, it's like these structures that we don't want to go back to, or volunteer fire departments. I saw one in one of the little towns I was going to in the Midwest, and I was like, most towns had volunteer fire departments. And people thought, if our neighbors' houses are burning down, we're going to take care of each other. We don't need some specialist to take care of each other. We're going to take care of each other because we know each other and we care about each other, and it's our friends' houses that are burning down, And we've been so removed from all our ability to care, and a fire is a loss. And so wouldn't that be nicer to have your neighbors come and help with your house burning down? Because it isn't just putting out the fire, it's the trauma, holding your heart at the same time. And I was thinking, what a loss that volunteer fire departments have been lost because of that,
Maybe just lost in areas where there's not the budget.
Right. No, that's...
Because there's a lot of...
Are there?
Yeah, volunteer fire stations and fire departments around here. But this is a really rural area,
okay.
too, so.
That's where I saw one, which is in a little rural town. I was like, I haven't seen a sign. Yeah. I lived for Vermont a long time, and there's only 500,000 people. I thought I would live there for my whole life, and I don't. And it's
like people taking care of each other, like you said, and like... Yeah. And probably, it'd be cool if if people could make a living just doing this work, because it's so much work. And
it would be, so much, yeah. Or we could move. You see those structures. I feel like my goal would be more make a living, but transition into we're all actually doing what we want to do. Yeah. And if we all just did that, we wouldn't actually need the mediation of the, commodity and bosses, because we wouldn't actually need bosses anymore. And then we'd be like, do we actually really need, because we're actually providing which is why I love the Occupy moment at the beginning of it, before, whatever, it became messier and messier, which I still love, but it was more messy. But literally the one I was part of, which I was talking a little bit about last night, I happened to be in Philly and end up being part of the beginning of Occupy Philly, and it was 1,000 people, most of whom had never, ever in their lives, it was like a political awakening for most of them, much less they'd never done anything self-organized. Literally, we had this big assembly, where are we going to occupy? 1,000 people were at it. Anarchists, we were facilitating because we know, but it was in a giant church, and so we had a. Okay, well, I'll just pick them. So I was talking about Occupy Philly, and but anyway, 1,000 people were like, which square we're gonna. So we had we did this anarchist facilitated conversation about the 5 spaces that people were considering, and then the next was so when do we want to do it? And all the anarchists were like, we should take a week or 2 to get together, because we're this is a room of people who've never done this. And through the process of us coming to, a decision, it was a day or 2. And we were all like, all the anarchists, it was actually humorous, were like, this is going to be a disaster. And all the people had never done that. And then the next day there was an entire functioning community of 1,000 people, food and healthcare and library and childcare and keeping people okay and all the other decision-making structures. And we were like, wow, that actually challenged, and I was like, I was crying actually that day. I was like, this is why I believe in it. Like, I do believe that people have the capacity. I mean, I was like, this is so emotional because I know, like, if anything proves time and time again when these happen, I'm like, it isn't that anarchism is this absurd idea. It's just the common sense of people know how. But I was so struck by one guy came running up to me he became the videographer for documenting Occupy Philly. And he goes, this is so weird. He goes, I love doing video work, and everyone's like, you know how to do it really well, and is really excited for me to do that. No one else wants to do it. And he was part of the media working group, but he was like, no one else wanted to do it, and he loved doing it. And he goes, I thought everybody would want to be. That was the coolest thing to do, and I thought everyone wanted to do it. He goes, everyone here wants to do something, and we have everything, even people that were really excited about doing toilets. And at one point, they came to the assembly and were like, "There's only 5 of us. We need other people to think about how to deal with it." So we were all laughing, okay. We had a big conversation for an hour of assembly of how to, like, actually, which was real. But I was like, okay, everyone decided what they were really enthusiastic about. And that really touched me when he said that, and to me, that's what we want to move toward, that capacity to realize we actually can care for each other. Yeah. A woman asked me the other night who came to one of these who's not an anarchist. She turned to me at that break I always take, and she was like, anarchism? What is anarchism? And I was like, what do you think it is? And she goes, I'm pretty sure it's people that don't like authority. And she goes, but I'm not quite sure what they like instead. And I go, well, you've met an anarchist that focuses a lot on that, so I'll tell you, what I think, but just in a sentence or two. But then she goes, oh, that's all nice, but I don't know. She goes, people are greedy. And I go, oh, they're greedy because, I said, do you think they're just greedy, or do you think they're greedy because we're in a culture that is, valorizes that as a way to get ahead? And she goes, yeah. And I go, are you parts of things where that's not of value? And she goes, yeah. And I go, do you think as many people act that way? And she goes, no. And I go, it's not, yeah, we can be greedy, and some of us still will. But if that's not the main value within a space, most people, a few people might do it, but probably not as many. And during Occupy Philly, it may have, I don't know whether it occurred or not, but someone, let's just say they were raped. We never were quite sure. And the city newspaper wrote this horrible article about us, Occupy. Look, this is why we have to get the police to come destroy Occupy, because someone was raped. And I think at that point we were in month 2 or something. I don't even remember, because it lasted a long time. And there's this horrible article in the paper. And so this caucus of folks formed, and they wrote this beautiful response, and they did a press conference. And the response was, while we've been occupying for, let's say, 2 months, in Philly, reported rapes are 5 a day, and unreported percentages are X number. So there's been 8 times, blah, blah. There's been whatever, 100 rapes in Philly in the 2 months. But in our autonomous city, within the city, there's been 1. And that 1 we take really seriously, and it's 1 too many. And, we want none. But we've done a pretty good job of changing the culture of rape in 2 months, And I was like, okay, we have in that one rape, but that one rape got us all upset. We were all really upset over that. Like, that shouldn't be happening here. Does the rest of society think that way? Clearly not. Look what just happened with Kavanaugh, So I don't know. I'm really struck by how people do become transformed in these spaces if we do it contiguously, which is why I think, to come back to anarchism and why I've been doing this rebellious morning, I think as anarchists, we're so bad at doing these things. They're increasingly episodic. We have no memory. J20 was a disaster. Not because of the police. It was a disaster because we did not have the preparation ahead of time for legal structures, solidarity, direct action trainings on how there are different roles at demonstrations. And people showed up, literally a lot of people that I know were the defendants. One person said, I just happened to be in D.C. that day. I knew no one. I walked with a gathering spot, saw people, and just started walking with it, and wasn't even an anarchist, and happened to be a person who has so many identity categories that the state focuses on. They were one of the defendants that I thought was in the most harm's way. And I was like, this is our failure, that we don't have a culture of contiguous, and I hope that one of the lessons that comes out of it is that we keep some of the infrastructure together, because what's happening already, I see, we were all so startled that all the charges got dropped quickly overnight. And I think all of us are still kind of in this weird mourning, confusion. And one person, it's not anti. None of us have language, because we're really glad the charges got dropped, but we haven't even been able to celebrate it, much less process it. But much of the support is just, it's gone almost. And I'm like, that's a bad thing. Like, why wouldn't we keep those structures together? Mm-hmm. I know some of the reasons, because people have bad feelings toward each other, or different things came up, people felt uncared for, and all that to me is a signal. We just need to keep pushing through this and figure out better ways to care for each other. So, I don't know. I think we're much worse. We're worse toward each other often as anarchists than people in religious institutions internally are to each other, because they have a contiguous practice of, but it's hierarchical and all sorts of other things we don't like, and maybe patriarchal, and maybe all these other things that we would not want. But, I don't know. So I really think we need to figure out ways of, like, how do we actually do this in multi-generational, continuous, just spaces that you can always walk into and, find a book or find someone to talk to, or, and, because, I think a lot of people, when I do these talks, they go, oh, I'm really not advocating that we just try to think that our best friend can do this for us, or our partner. That's the point. We can't. We can't. Nuclear families can't support. We need to figure out ways to do this. So it's just the fabric of taking care of each other. But it is hard. I feel like I'm more and more empathetic even to the anarchists that have really, really hurt me through their patriarchal or abusive or power structure behaviors, because there's been plenty of horrible things that have hurt me within the anarchist world, and I think I'm more empathetic. I don't want to be around those people. I don't like those people, but that's not the whole of who they are, and I understand why anarchists are ripping each other apart, even though I think it's the wrong choices, or ripping each other off, or beating each other up, or anarchists do just as many horrible things to each other as everybody else in society, maybe sometimes even more, because we come into this with profoundly understanding how damaged we are by this world, but yeah, we can't, and I get how hard it is to sustain these, because all the forces try to break our structures apart, capital, the police, blah, blah, blah. But we have to try harder to not let there be these gaps. I don't know. So maybe it's a beautiful thing this year. I didn't really, so much that people are turning to, I spoke a few of them last night. People were like, we were talking about, what rituals could we bring back? Because colonialism has stolen, and capitalism has stolen huge, even including from witches and pagans, and have murdered them and stolen ways of healing and caring, and birth and death doulas. Like, people had all that wisdom. Now we look at our phones and we're looking for knowledge, and we forgot that we have wisdom, and so how do we get that wisdom back? And it's been ripped apart from us for hundreds and hundreds of years. It isn't an easy task.
So afraid, and still search for words to describe that pain, and cling to each other like pigeons in the rain. Lines all over feathered breath, with beaks all worn and cracked and stained. Hang on to each other, hang on to each other, hang on to each other. So this one's for the last one, and the dead ones, and the ones who fell away. All our busted brothers, torn lovers, spitting at the rain. We all got thing you love. Any fucking thing you love. Hang on to each other, you love. Hang on to each other, you love. Hang on to each other, you love. Birds toss precious flowers from the murky skies above. Birds toss precious flowers from the murky skies above. Birds toss precious flowers from the murky skies above. You love. Birds toss precious flowers. You love. From the murky skies above. You love. Any fucking thing you love. Any fucking thing you love. Any to each other you love. Any to each other you love.
But I was last night, a few of the examples I gave, but I really am struck by a lot of the examples when I've been doing these conversations. I'm like, when I say, oh, what are examples where people do it well? A lot of people are coming with examples from institutions that are not our own. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, I mean, I told this story last night, and maybe I'll do it again in your interview, where that someone is starting to go back to, I think it's, a lot of people are going back to Quaker and Unitarian. Obviously, if they're anarchists, they're going back to, we sit there until someone has something to say, and there's no hierarchy. But I think it's in a Unitarian structure where they have a bowl of water and after the service or whatever it is ends, and rocks, little pebbles next to the water, or a big pool of water, and people can walk by in the room where people congregate. And I think they have coffee too. That was the other thing they said. They have coffee and cookies and things, so people kind of stay there and eat. He goes, that's why I go. Actually, I just go and kind of avoid the service, and then I go for the time when people are in coffee and food and talk to each other and get to know. It's a small town. And he said, oh, the water, you come in and you can pick up a stone if you want to. And everyone's in the same room, and you can drop it in and say, you know, oh, I got a new job today. I'm really excited. You know, it's actually a job I like too, and I needed a job. And another person come by and say, oh, my grandma just died, and she'd been living in our house, and it feels really hard because I'm kind of at a loss of what to do with the care and love I was putting into that, and I miss my grandma. And someone else can just drop a rock in and not say anything. And he's like, it's not like anyone forces you to talk or anything, but then people are having coffee and food and hanging out, and some people, he goes, you know, go off in corners and talk, or other people it'll create a conversation, including about beautiful things. Oh, you got a job. But people know what's happening in each other's lives. And I was like, so that, I love that, even that little thing. I was like, oh, we should have those in almost every anarchist, I don't know, you know, maybe when we have if we have a collective or we're doing organized political organizing and we meet every week, like, why couldn't we do that? You know, like, have something like that if we're doing anti-police work and we're meeting every week.
But with like the pebble in the water, the way you described it last night, some of the significance you could draw out of that, or that people some relief release that someone could get from it was like, you drop it, it creates a ripple. Those ripples like interact with each other, and so even that person who walks in and drops the thing, they signify to all the people around them, like, I have a thing, I'm not ready to share it, but it's impacting all of yours. Yeah. And it kind of displaces the water too, even just a little bit.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
Like, we're a part of a community, we have an impact. We like.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was talking last night about rocks as a Jewish cultural tradition and sites of mourning and death where you put rocks together. So I hadn't thought about that with a big thing of what the rocks will end up being together. So you see that there's a lot of things going on, and also the ripples overlapping. You see, like, we're actually, like, was it like one loss isn't just one loss. One loss, we always have multiple losses when we have one loss because we're part of a social fabric. And you know, like I said, you lose your house, you lose things in it that mean to you. Maybe you lose
memory,
or a cat dies in it, or all these things, memories. So, and where are you going to live? You know, community you might. But the ripples actually overlapping not only show that our losses spiral out other losses, but they might overlap, or they give us connection to have empathy with each other. It is a beautiful metaphorical thing, you know. But I'm thinking, you know, I mean, my collective has been trying to do this, and I know others around this place called the United States have been trying to do something called Care Not Cops, and some people focus on how do we have better structures for mental health challenges and care so that people don't have to turn to police and get murdered. Other places are like, we've done some workshops on if you're getting assaulted by someone that you think loves you, how would you think of other models to deal with that? Or we've done some workshops around different ways of dealing with things, for instance, and other ways of thinking about it. And my collective, I'm going to miss it, but they're going to do like a little assembly where they're just opening up space for people to talk about how would other ways we'd care for each other instead of calling on police. Just have conversations because we don't know the answers. Mm-hmm. But if we were meeting more repetitively, which we haven't been as just that campaign, I hadn't really thought about that, like starting off each thing of letting people just, have some kind of thing at the beginning where people, it doesn't have to be that specific exercise, but where people are able to just, light candles together and not even say why or drop stones in, or, we really don't structure. We do that when there's like a profound rupture. Again, when a cop murders someone, you happen to be in the city where that happens, and there is a very human impulse, which I thought has been beautiful about people pouring out in the street and creating DIY shrines. Mm-hmm. There's been such a big outpouring of that as a key site, and because people don't have neighborhoods, community centers, and I mean, it just shows you that there's very little common space anymore. The sidewalk has now become the terrain of people creating cemeteries and memorials, because that's all we have. Mm-hmm. And even that we don't have because they take it at time. They rip, or the police come and rip it down again and again and again. And there's actually a beautiful story in Rebellious Morning about these two parents that lost a child to police, murdered by police, and it's on the 1-year anniversary. It's a beautiful piece because they believed in cops, and the piece shows their transformation over the year about in a community where people kept honoring that and fighting against what was happening and being there with them. And they say they didn't understand why people protest and why people. But it's a beautiful piece. In the middle of it, they're like, I can't get enough of going out where there are demonstrations. I can't get enough of being around the neighborhood support because it's letting me grieve. I didn't understand that the police weren't our friend. But their whole struggle was they knew they wouldn't get justice at some point from the police. They did believe in the police. They did believe in the structure. And over the course of the years, they realized none of that was going to do anything for them, and the community was caring for them. But what they wanted was a permanent marker on the hill where their son was shot dead by police, which is a beautiful hill on the Mission in San Francisco overlooking, and that whole neighborhood's being gentrified, and everyone that looks like them that's Latino is being kicked out of it. Mm-hmm. But that's all they wanted. And I think they finally got it, but it took the city, because basically it would be the city saying, and the police saying, we murdered your child. Yeah. And so of course they didn't want to do it, But I think that's so beautiful that but there's something deeply human when people get together and create those. They make art, they bring flowers, they tell stories, they hug each other, the different families come together and meet each other. People figure out how to do funeral, all the things that the churches used to, you're right. Could we come cook meals for you for the next 5 weeks? Could we, or that family in particular started doing this thing where they would do a walk every month. And I think they still do it on the anniversary, up that hill and to the spot, and then walk down and have a community dinner. And because he was killed eating dinner on that spot, and and for them that was one way of them processing. And we have to create our own structures like that. But they were because they come from a different culture that actually has collective traditions. It isn't because they're radicals, And how do we as radical? I think it's funny how uniquely bad we are. I keep thinking about this. Anarchists are the best at self-organizing and thinking about self-determination, self-organizing, self-management, except we're super, super, super bad, almost more than most other people, about self-organizing together, care and structures of care really wide. I'm using that widely, not just around loss. Why, or self-determining when the things that impact us the most deeply, we kind of go, I have to go to this funeral in my family and I'm not getting anything out of this that I need. Well, why don't you organize a separate thing with your friends and mark it in a different way, or ask if you can have some of the ashes and honor that person you love in a different way, which some of my anarchist friends do. They're like, I know my family's going to have this horrible. A friend of mine just had a really horrible loss of a family member that was their key family member, and they got a little bit of their ashes and they put them in a coffee bag that their family member loved. It was this little scrappy little, he was like a quirky little artist and made all these little funny, and he liked collecting debris, like making art out of things. So he made art. And it's this funny little coffee container, and took the ashes and is now doing all these things that they knew that family member wanted, and their mainstream family did something that he wouldn't have wanted. he said, I want my ashes to be sent off on a boat. And he wanted all these funny things to be done. And so they've done all these little things, making little, sending him. And like, okay, you can do that.
Yeah.
But so many anarchists go, oh, I'm now can't because my family, yes, you can. Even if you can't get
even if it's not the actual ashes, it doesn't matter.
Who cares?
It's for you.
No, do whatever you think you need to do. Or one guy the other night at one of these said, oh, I've had this loss. And he started crying. It was actually a macho-y guy, and he started crying. It was really interesting. And afterward, everyone said, oh, we all know him. He's part of our community, and we've never seen him open up like that. That's really good for us after you leave, which is one thing I'm trying to do, encourage people. This isn't do what you need to do afterward, but actually I've been really struck by people doing things in front of each other they wouldn't do except me, other people coming. That's why we need to have places where you can come, someone you don't know, to talk about these things. But he's crying. He said, oh, I've had these horrible losses. And he goes, I don't know. I don't think this is grieving. I think it's an unhealthy thing. I have this like repetitive urge to burn things. And he goes, so one of the losses was near Christmas. So he goes, every Christmas I get a Christmas tree, and instead of putting it up, I take it outside and I burn it. And he goes, that's really unhealthy. And everyone's like, that's gorgeous. And everyone's like, invite us this year, And I was like, and he goes, do you think? And we're like, people go, flame is such a heal, like water, flame, all these things are, cremation came out of people doing it collectively together. It wasn't in a place off to the side in a garage in a dark alley, which is where cremation used to go. A lot of it. It's actually only coming out of the light, literally, or the darkness, cremation, where funeral homes are now realizing they can make money off it. But it literally, most cremations, there was a huge period of decades in this place in the United States where it was in alleys and like little sheds, And I've been to 2 of them, and I had to go into this really weird, like down an alley to this place, and the guy was like, oh, no one ever comes here, and we had such a good time, and he let me participate in the whole thing. He was like so happy at the end. He goes, I hope I see you again soon. I'm like, I hope not. He started laughing. but I got to watch what I wanted to watch, and he let me open up, and I got to see flames. And when it was, you could see a sort of an outline of, at that point it was this beautiful flame, and I was like, that felt so healing for me, Other people wouldn't want to do that, but I really, at that moment, I was like, why did I want to do this? I wanted to do this because people used to do this together with a bunch of people, and it does feel healing, So I don't know, it's just I love opening up space where people go, I have this horrible, weird thing that I've never told anyone, that I like to burn Christmas trees, and it's really unhealthy. And I was like, why would that be unhealthy?
As long as it's not burning them when they're in other people's
houses. Yeah, then that would be unhealthy. There's plenty all right. But then we can also self-determine what's not healthy. But I think as anarchists, it's so funny how that story I told about the Radical Atlanta Book Fair, the person I co-organized with it, who has come through a different political tradition that's anti-authoritarian but isn't anarchist specifically. And she goes, wow. She goes, after we did that, it actually worked. And it was so beautiful. And people were crying. People kept coming up to us and telling us even more beautiful stories. It was we wish we could have gone on for 2 hours. It was really beautiful space. And people were showing good examples of caring for each other without the police. And she said, she goes, wow, I didn't actually think it was going to work. And then she said, maybe I'm not anarchist enough. She goes, I thought we're in an auditorium. They told us to do a Q&A. We should just do it. And I go, oh, well, lucky. Well, it was great we collaborated, because I would never have done a PowerPoint. And that worked really well. And I am enough of an anarchist where I'm like, this is a space I don't like. I'm going to change it. And I think me experiencing loss, what led to this book, is like so much of the time is like I'm alone, having to deal with this in a place that I never thought I'd have to deal with all this, and in my personal losses, and at every moment I'm like, this isn't how I'm an anarchist. I don't want the space to be. And I did it with people who weren't anarchists, and I didn't, most of them never to this day would even know I'm an anarchist, and they kept saying to me, wow, you're the first person that realized we were a community. My 2 moms are in an assisted living home, and they kept going, you're the first person that realized this was our home. And you're the first person that realized we could come here to live, not die. And I didn't go, that's because I'm an anarchist. And I said, and to them, and you all took such good care of me because you spent your whole life taking care of your husbands, and now you don't have, you're here and you poured all that love onto me, because it's mostly women whose bodies are, it was really striking to me, whose bodies are seen as worthless, and because they're not productive,
Producing.
Reproductive, they're dying, and I think they internalize like I'm useless, and I was like, I'm an anarchist. I look at them as inherently valuable, but I didn't make magic for them. I just brought who I was to them, and they brought who they were to them, which was structured to be caretakers, but they did it in a way where it's so egalitarian. It was so moving for both of us, so I hope this is kind of an encouragement for all of us to think through how we can just keep doing this. But like prefiguration isn't something that's like in the future or some thought. For me, it isn't just a word or just like, oh, think about it as a theoretical experiment or a way to write, which I do a lot, or, public. It's like a deep practice every moment with people, whether it's one-on-one or how we live our lives. Or I just think if we have to look through James C. Scott, I use this a lot when I talk about what is anarchism. James C. Scott has this thing where he says, I look, seeing like the state is, I put on the state's lens and I look through the world and see how the state sees. His work's really powerful that way. I see how it sees so we can understand it and not actually go after how it sees so we can better contest it, which is really good. Eminent thinking. You need to know what it thinks to contest it. But then as he does in 2 Cheers for Anarchism, which is a great book, he goes, I put on anarchist lenses. And when I do, I see hierarchy and domination. I see how we could get to a world without it. And he goes, but if I took up, and I was like, whoa. And then I'm like, I don't want us to actually have, I wear glasses. So it's, for me, I love that. I've been using that a lot. And then it just hit me a few months ago. I'm like, wait a minute. I want us to have it built into I don't want it to be the glasses. I want it to be the actual lenses in our eyes so we can't actually remove it. Prefigurative politics where we stop forgetting we're doing it. Like, we're doing it because that is our practice. Like, we're not prefiguring. I don't even know what the language for it is.
Yeah.
We're just doing it all. Like, it is contiguous with the moment, not modeling the world we want in the future, which clearly is a fraught way of thinking about it, too, because we're around us is all these other forces. But
to dig back to spiritual practices or whatever, creating heaven on earth.
Yeah.
Is it sort of just a
or maybe it's more maybe the better word for it is Gramscian, we need to have a different hegemonic cultural practices that people don't even think. We don't even think about a bunch of behaviors that we do. I've like rapid response networks. One of my collectivist members who happens to be well, I won't say their identity categories, but through their own experiences, they still have a social fabric. And so in their cultural experiences. And so they said, I really hate the rapid response networks. And we're all like, what? Because we were about to start one. And they go, because it's still the same thing. Instead of calling 911, you call the anarchists. And why are we the ones that have the answer? And they were saying, what we need to be working on is where there's enough of a social fabric where you know who to turn to. And you're not calling a number. And I was like, which is not a critique of rapid response networks, because we're not to that society where we are there yet. She wasn't saying that, but she's like, it was more just a challenge to us as a collective to think of what other thing could we do whenever, or if we do it, and there's plenty of good rapid response networks which are trying to do both. So I don't want to minimize that. But yeah, so maybe it's more just hegemonic, where if you grow up in certain religious traditions, you don't even think about the fact that when someone dies, people are going to bake casseroles for the next 5 weeks and put them in their freezer and make sure they have food for the next 5 weeks. They don't even think about it. They didn't need an app to tell them to think about it, And
I don't know if it was in the This Is Hell interview. I think it was, because I don't think it was the Solecast one. But when you were talking about being in that, near the end of one of your parents' lives, just doing the act of leaving the door open and allowing that space for people to come in, and people just kind of naturally just being like, oh, the door's not closed, this person hasn't just disappeared, they've they're still there and they're going through this process, I get to go in and be in this process with them. Even that easy of a thing, it's prefigurative, it's also just opening a door. I think that's really beautiful.
Well, it was also, that example specifically, and it was with the consent of the person who was dying, and her biological daughter, who's like my chosen sister. They're like part of my chosen family, so I never know. The language is weird. But it wasn't just me, but it wasn't an imposed thing. But it was because my biological mom had been in the same place, and they were best friends for most of their life, and are chatterboxes and really vivacious and warm. And so they kept pointing out, wait, there's a Hippocratic oath. So when someone gets sick and dies, all the families assert, or the place just asked you. They just said, oh, we're invoking, They don't even really ask you, actually. It's just this thing where, once you get to the moment and anyone's going to come in that's upping the medical, you're not supposed to share. It's confidential, right? You're not supposed to share what's happening with you. So doors get shut because of a Hippocratic oath. So we agreed we had to waive it. We don't want, if someone asks you what's happening down the hall, you can say, oh, Mary's dying. It's fine to say that. We told them it was okay. So on the one hand, it was subverting a structure. So as an anarchist, I'm like, we're being told we have to not do that. She didn't want to do that. And we opened her door. Sometimes it was closed, but it was always unlocked, and she, whatever. It was basically an open door, there were times when she's like, I want to go to sleep or something, where, it wasn't like just bother her. But pretty much there were people in the room almost always. I mean, I slept in her room next to her, so there was someone there always, which is why I was there when she died. But you know, there was and even when she died, it was me. I was literally in her recliner, really comfortable, those chairs that go all the way back. When I was in that chair by her bed at that point, which she had to be moved in because she basically lived in this chair. And so I lived in her chair next to her bed. And I just woke up and I looked over and I could see that she was, I don't even know why. I just walked over and I was like, because I'd already seen. And this really young woman came in who was a paid care worker who'd gotten to so love Mary and was like, oh, she feels like my grandma too. And I was like, she is your grandma. Why isn't she? You know? And so everybody in the place also felt like she was their parent or grandma or mom or friend. And she happened to be on the other. We were both on the side of the bed and we were both holding her hand. And she died and she started sobbing. And I was tearing up, but I'd been through death, so I wasn't quite at that moment sobbing as much as I would later. And she said, oh, this is the first time I've ever done this. Thank you. You know, and we had this beautiful caring moment with each other and with her. So you open up these spaces where you let people, like for her, I hadn't even thought about that moment. She said, I feel like this is my grandma. And I go, it is. It's okay. It's okay. You're crying. She kept trying to, I go, why wouldn't I want you to cry right now? You know? And she goes, well, we're told not to as care workers. And I go, but you're not, you're a human being, you know? And so even these moments, I just, you know, to me, that's the work we do as anarchists. We don't open it up for each other. We open, you know, why shouldn't that care person learn that she can care as a care worker? You know, it isn't a job that you punch in and you punch out of. And I had so many care workers over the course of 2.5 years being in our hospitals. Most of the doctors said they never talked about death. So I spent a huge amount of time talking to doctors about how to talk about death. Because it's like, here I am with nothing to do. Why not talk to them instead of reading the Better Homes and Gardens magazine in the lobby? But also I spent a whole time with these care workers that told me horrible stories. They said, you don't understand how hard it is. We're told not to care, but you do care, and you can't figure out how to set boundaries, but you have to, but you don't want to. And all these stories. And so I was like, I want you to be part of, it's okay to have a different relationship, to destabilize the hierarchy of how they're. You're not a paid worker across from me right now. You're a human being that is experiencing someone you care about and may have fallen in love with dying. You know, I don't know. I feel like that's, for me, was really profound to be like, I want to make this a moment that feels like what I want it to be for me. I mean, if she had just said, oh, got to go to my next person, checked a box and done a form, we could say it's a selfish act in a way too. I don't like that word. But it wasn't that I was just doing it for her. Like it had an impact on me to see someone else crying and being as sad as me at that moment. I wouldn't have wanted someone to just check a box and walk out of the room. So it's reciprocal. That's a better word. That's the word I'm searching for in my tired brain. Where we're all, you don't even know who's caring for each other anymore, you know? So I don't know. No, but yeah, it is. Why don't we just keep opening doors? I mean, that's a really good metaphor. We have the power as anarchists, and we do so often are the ones that open the door for social critique, open the door. I would hope we do this not as well, and we should open the door for possibility, open the door for seeing a social vision. And at this moment, more than ever, wow, you know, I mean, I was with some 18-year-olds the other night. I think I might have used this example. I'm tired, so I can't remember, but a whole bunch of 18-year-olds, and they just moved to go to their first year of college in a small Midwestern town. They'd all grown up in smaller towns, and were struggling with, like, you know, wow, I'm having an epiphany that the world isn't okay. But they all said, but you don't understand. Also, all of us have grown up where all the dystopias we watch on TV and the apps and everything we do are all dystopias. But they said, but unlike dystopias that other people probably used to grow up with and one of them said to me, you know, I read 1984 in high school and the copyright date is 1948. And they go, now there's a show called American Horror Story, I think, I don't remember if that was the right name, where the next season is about Trump. And it's supposed to be a dystopia, but they go, that's our life. Yeah. Like, you know, when Trump says fake news, in a way, it's like fake news is the reality. It isn't fake anymore. It's the reality. Like, you know, his dystopia
TV
is right. And so I thought, and they all were like, we're 18 and we are living in a dystopian, like, or Black Mirror and all these other shows that are pointing that out.
They can only reflect what's
happening in society. But I was like, the time frame. So, you know, the time frame now that we're like ecological, the time is being so collapsed. And so I think what we need to do is also self-determine that we want to open up space to slow that down and feel it, because we don't know how much time we have. Like, which is how every time I've dealt with death now, open up space. Like, time does change when grief is happening. It's really, I've written a lot about that too, because just for me to, like, sometimes things seem really long. Your sense of time becomes, stop using the Western clock. You don't even understand how time works. It's very confusing. But you realize some things, you can change time during those moments. You realize how flexible time is. I think it's what it does. It opens up new ways to think about it. And so part of us is like saying we need to slow down how we're thinking about this moment to open up the door for letting in that there's, in the here and now, if we look at each other, we are creating little, someone who I know is trans, who's really young, said this really profound thing to me. They said, when I realized I just started calling myself trans, I've just started dressing and rename myself. And they said, everyone says, it's this moment where you can focus on moving past the dysphoria you feel in the world. And they said, for me, it was this light bulb of when I'm moving toward the euphoria that I've always wanted to feel. And I feel nothing but euphoria, and I was like, okay, I'm not to minimize it. They still feel huge amounts of pain, and they've lost family members, and they, but I was so strict that they didn't negate the losses they're feeling, but they said, I'm letting in the moments of things that I've never been able to feel before, and we have to do that right now. We're living in a dystopia that, utopia is such a fraught word, but we have to continue to create lives. We have to create those spaces right now where we actually remember, because we're not gone yet. I don't know. I don't like those kids that said we're already in this. We're already gone. I was like, no, but you're sitting here right now with each other. Like, you can reshape how you want to experience. Because they said, the other thing I was really struck by. They said, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every second, we're bombarded by news. And I said, wow, when I was a kid, we used to get a newspaper. I'd forgotten about that. We used to get a newspaper. My parents loved getting the newspaper, and it came, and it was a family thing. We would, at dinner, look at the newspaper headlines, and they'd turn on the news, and we would talk about the news, because we did that. We'd always, over dinner, talk about the news and debate what was happening in the world every day as we did dinner. And that was the one time my family was always like, we need to eat dinner together. And we all ate different things, and we fought, and we didn't want to do it, but we did it. And I think that's why I believe in communities. It's like, here's the time of day when the community comes together. But we would talk about what's going on in the world. But that was the time when it was structured to let in. It's not like me. I think about it all the time, But it wasn't the bombardment, Yeah. And so, it's not an anti-technology argument. But we could, technology has changed us. And it is really hard. I get it. I try to, put my phone away. And then how do we structure time where we don't put our phones just aside for security culture reasons, which might not even be security culture, because then the government's like, all the anarchists have just turned their phones off simultaneously. Yeah. What are they doing? but structure in time where let's not spend our time obsessed about what Trump is saying or what Twitter, but stretch out time where we can actually talk about how we're feeling and be really present. I mean, that's one thing I've been trying to do with these sharing times or brave spaces, holding spaces. Let's actually, I do this all the time. You saw that last night. People have this tendency to want to put their chairs. I go, let's form a circle and move closer together. Yeah. No one will ever. It's really, some places it's really intriguing. People will do it right away. Other places, last night, no one would sit next to me. The circle's really wide, and then people didn't come back, and there's more empty chairs. I'm like, okay, let's move closer. But didn't it take me 2 or 3 times of, let's get a little closer. Because when people can, or you and I are sitting really close, pretty close right now, and I can look in your eyes and can see the changes in your facial expressions and body language, and so it becomes, people will say more things to each other when they feel the sense of a humanness between each other. But I'm so struck by those spaces where we're holding space. Nobody was looking at their cell phone last night during that conversation. And movingly, 2 people, one person ahead of time told me, I'm really shy, I won't say anything. And they do a lot of grief work. And I was like, I really wish you would, because you have a lot to say. But they go, I won't. And they were the first person to speak last night. And they spoke twice, and they had a lot to say. And another person in the room said, I don't know why I wasn't planning to say anything, and I feel moved to speak. It's because we all together created a different understanding of time, and we pushed out all the things that get caught up and that distract us. And you were there last night too. 3 or 4 people said, wow, I haven't actually stopped to let this thing in that isn't a distraction, but it is precisely what I want to be and should be thinking about. So we changed the narrative of the hurts that were coming in, and we change the narrative of how we wanted to handle those hurts. And so to me, that's that prefigure. Let's not just, we're doing the social critique and the social visioning together on our own terms, not on what Facebook or Twitter's letting us do. But I'm always struck by every time I do that, that always happens. People, I'm not going to speak, but they do. I was at one thing where one of my really close friends who's had a lot of loss and was in front of everybody they knew in the community. And it was actually a great event. We had this huge, great potluck, and we did this thing, and then people wanted to share for like 2 or 3 hours, and people hung out in the space for another 4 hours, and small conference. It was really lovely. I was like, we could leave, and everyone's like, no, we're having. But she said, I've never, and she's a really open, transparent, honest, but she always shares everything. And she said, I've never shared the deepest of my losses, and she did. And she goes, I don't know why I've been so scared. She goes, you all know me. Why am I so scared? And her voice was shaking. She goes, I don't know. I'm scared. This is the deepest pain, and what if the community that I always said, I don't know why she chose to do that. And after she goes, wow, I wasn't expecting to do that, you know. And then she said all these people since have asked her about it and like talked to her about it, and, you know, and she's found different ways to grapple with it, good and bad, or rethought how she's thought about thinking about it, you know. I don't know. It's really intriguing to me. You do these spaces and we do things we hadn't planned. Or there's an incredibly moving story in here by a friend I got to know really well during the Montreal student strike, Kevin, who asked to write a piece for this. He designed Taking Sides. And so I'm not saying anything that he hasn't said in his piece in here. But he asked to write a piece, and I didn't know what he was going to write. I thought he was going to write about something else. And he said, oh, can I write about that he says sexually assaulted. I would say rape, but it's his way of, it's his story. At a summer school for 3 or 4 years, and he wrote a piece about it. But the process of writing about it was incredible because he'd never really talked that much about it. A few times he talked to people, but not that much. And he's like, I'm ready to start processing it. So writing about it was processing it, and he was processing it with me, who was saying that sentence this way, you know, and here's him sharing me his story, and then I'm also having to curate and edit and create an arc and a story around his pain, you know. So we were doing the collective work of grief. But as we got closer and closer, you know, he was like getting closer and closer to this is going to be public, which he knew all along, but I could watch the changes in him being like, oh, wow, I need to let people know. And I'm like, you haven't done, you know. And the first talk we've done 2 public talks about, he's come to 2 of them when I'm in a city. And the first one was in Toronto where he grew up, and a huge amount of people came to that one because there was 4 or 5 people on it, because there was 3 or 4 other people that had contributed. And he invited his dad. And I was like, that's an interesting choice, because he'd never really talked to his dad about it. And the second time, his mom happened to be in town, which was in Montreal. And I had dinner with him and his mom beforehand. And she didn't come to the talk because she had to leave. But he said, oh, yeah, we've spent a lot of the time she's been visiting, talking about it, processing it, which is... And then the event, that was the one event where we didn't do the sharing because he really wanted to talk a lot about it. And he mostly spoke, and we didn't have time to do as much sharing. But I was like, it was his healing. Like I don't know, I want to use the word healing space because he'll be doing processing it for the rest of his life. But he invited his partner, and everyone in the room was people that was his social circle and close friends. And he said, I wanted this to be a space where I could talk to the people in a collective way about this together, you know. And I was so struck. And then a few days later, he came to the 3rd event, which people had experienced a really profound loss, and suggested people come to the space that they heard I was holding to talk about it right after it happened. And I thought, I'm glad I heard about that in advance, because it would have been wholly unprepared. And he was going to talk more about it, and I was really struck by, he was like, I don't need to do this here. But then it was the most emotional I've ever seen him at the space, because everyone got very emotional. And so I was like, I don't know, I was really struck by, like, okay, this isn't something that was just an essay, you know, and that he made these really absurdly brave choices to process it through the process of writing, to then process it in public with his parents or his friends or his partners.
It's like a muscle that he's exercising. It's just getting stronger, sort of.
Yeah, and I'm like, this isn't a one-time thing that happens. But I was like, wow, he's so self-determined in such a profoundly brave way, and he has helped to create and craft the spaces to do that. He has made choices of how to do that. Like, he has done all these really... I'm not going to just let this happen to me in ways that I didn't want to happen to me. I don't want to go have this conversation with my parent without them having read how I want to curate, how I want to bring out the story, you know. Even though they knew it happened, but they didn't know the depth of it. And so I don't know. It's just like, how do we do this in ways that... It's funny, it'd be interesting for him to reflect back someday, if he feels like it, on writing it up instead of me telling the story. Him telling the story of how he's gone through the processing, because it's been super beautiful, in him allowing, through him telling other people. I mean, I watched people that he told that story to that were going through their own grieving about what happened to their bodies, and how that created space for them was such a gift for him to do that for other people. You know, and also his story was provoking, because people don't think of people with the body in categories that he have experiencing that. So yeah, I'm talking way too long for your show, but you can cut and edit me. But the challenge to think about how we do these in so many. I just feel so like after doing this for the year, I'm just like, oh my God, there's so many thousands of other ways. I just feel, again, I keep going back to honor, because that's why with it is an honor to be around people that are being brave enough to be vulnerable in front of each other, and to let each time I'm like, wow, I don't know. Someone asked me that last night at the break. She said, I don't know how you do this. This must be so draining. And she had actually asked that question about having to step back and feeling burned out. And I said, I feel precisely the opposite. Mm-hmm. It's when I stop doing this, I start getting really depressed when I go home. And it's not that I'm depressed or heavy because I'm listening to the grief. It's because every time I've done this, there hasn't been one time when people haven't, at least one person in the room or the whole room hasn't, like, done some remarkable self-determination about it and self-organization about how they want to just face up to things that are the profoundest things in their life that they're grappling with, and have done it in ways, and everybody's been so empathetic and so respectful, and really listen well, and like almost all of them turn into dialogues, not questioning it, like a shared conversation. I'm like, I know it's one of those moments where I'm like, I know we have the capacity to do this. Isn't some, like, how would anarchism work in the real world? How would it work if we actually cared for each other collectively? That's fine and dandy, but it doesn't actually work. And most of us feel abandoned and hurt and burned out. We only do because we have no examples of it working. And I've had the entire year been around nothing but hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of moments that people have shown me time and again. Not one time I have had someone show me they haven't been able to do it collectively, And I was like, wow. It actually gives me faith, more faith than I had at the beginning of this year, which is why I want people to do this, because I'm like, I think it's going to actually do the opposite. Yeah. I think we're burned out because we think it's not possible. And I'm so lucky that I know it's possible. I was talking to a friend last night, I've also struck this last year. Those of us that were part of the pre-9/11 moment, or part of the anti-capitalist, anti-globalization era, all think another world is possible, which is what that slogan was, which doesn't mean we think everything's great. And almost everyone born after that time, that slogan seems absurd. If we actually put that on a banner now, people, what the, and most of our banners are anti-fa, anti-this, anti-that, it's really telling. And, or out of, or sorrowful or angry, in a way that people don't understand. Those are grief. But most people don't think that's possible. We're talking about what a loss that is. And so doing these things actually, I think, is a way we're going to begin to, that slogan, another world is possible, maybe is not the right slogan for this moment, but, the mourning our dead, fighting for the living, or,
It's angry enough that it can fit.
Yeah. No, but I also think if we started thinking about maybe another world isn't possible, but another, community. You can co-curate at my anarchist summer school. I don't know that I can do this for the whole world, but I think I maybe can do this for 8 days with 35 people. I feel like that's possible, but each of those people after the end, that's why I did a non-closing circle at the end. I was like, okay, but I was like, okay, what's a metaphor for how we're leaving this space? And I used to be part of another anarchist summer school, and they did this stupid web of interactive, and we all had to say how happy we were. And I was like, so we could leave. And I was like, wait a minute, everyone's experiencing profound sorrow, and a lot of us don't like each other in the same way, and we're not in a web, we're whatever. And so I was like, oh, what to me is more like, and there had been this echinacea outside the barn where we were meeting, so I took some echinacea. I don't know whether it worked or not, but it felt powerful to me, so even if it didn't work for anyone else. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to take this strainer and pass it around, a bouquet of it. I pulled it up. It's echinacea. It's a healing plant. It's I've been looking at it the whole time because I thought it was really beautiful. It's been changing every day. It's not stayed the same. Is it growing? Is it dying? And so I passed around each person. I want you to look at it, not take a picture of it while we're doing, not closing circle. Have whatever relationship you want with it. Take a petal. Do whatever you want with it. And it went all the way around. It came back to me at the end. And I said, okay, on the one hand, this is such a hard moment because we're like, I don't want to go back. And I go, we're going back to the world that isn't the world we want. We created the world. We can do this. And so I was like, I'm going to pull off the petals because we're all going places. But there's still this thing that's the thing left. There's still a stem. It grew, and then I threw it and I go, okay, I know we're growing together, and we're not going to just, but what we're doing is we're taking all this and we're going to all go and bring those flowers out there. We're going to bring, we're going to, and all that. I love that phrase.
Pollen on the wind or whatever.
Yeah, or that seed, they tried to bury us, but, they try, but we're the seeds of this new world. I really, and I was like, okay, and it's weird. It's so cool because I am in such constant touch with most people that went to that, a lot of the people that went to that, and a lot of us have made a lot of effort to see each other since then. So I think there was a way we created such a deep community. Everyone's like, this isn't an end. Maybe it's actually a beginning. It's been really beautiful. I don't know if that's the right metaphor, but I really feel like, yeah, there's a way in which when we create these things, we know better how to create it elsewhere. So all these people are like, oh, I'm going to go. And I've seen a lot of them in their towns since then, or talked to them. And they're like, oh, I totally changed the way I do things. I'm doing this where I live now. Like, oh, great. We don't have to keep it to those 8 days. Whoever said we had to, Like, and I don't need to be parts of all of them. None of us could be. Another world isn't possible, but another where I live is possible. Another how I do my political work is possible. I don't know what the slogan. We don't need a slogan for it.
But if like grieving is a process and it's not just like a one-time thing that you get done with, then just like that sort of conscious get-together of 8 days, it changed all of you, and so you carry that with you into the next.
Yeah, and we carry keeping an open heart and an open mind. I don't think we're carrying. That's what we're carrying, because our open hearts and our open mind. Sometimes our hearts are broken. Sometimes our hearts are madly in love. Sometimes our hearts feel despondent. The heart's such a. We get back to, I really like feeling, and we have things happen to us, our hearts get broken literally and figuratively, and I told that story last night, when people get evicted that are 80 and 90 years old that have lived in their homes for their whole lives, their hearts get broken and they almost always die within a week or two, almost always. And I was like, heartbreak kills people. The emotional heartbreak gives people heart attacks, and it isn't just a silly metaphor. It's like it causes physiological.
Or sometimes when people lose loved ones like
they die almost
children or parents or
people
partners
die really quickly. One of the physician's assistant or whatever, almost a doctor that I knew through 3 deaths, said to me, she goes, oh yeah, she goes, she goes, almost always, because she does hospice work, she goes, if people have been together for a long time in a relationship, she goes, either she goes, there's almost no in between. She goes, either they die within really quick time of each other, always under a year and often within months, but she goes always within a year, or the person that didn't die lives a long time. And so either they have the capacity in their heart to incorporate it in a way that allows them to live, or they die. Yeah. And there isn't any in between. And so that again for me was a lesson. I was like, oh, we have to incorporate this, because as an anarchist I have to figure out how to not let my heartbreak make me
if grieving is a part of life, then,
or step away, or be so hard that I become bitter, or whatever it is. I have to figure out a way. That metaphor, when she told me that, I was like, okay, this is a challenge. Like, we have to figure out a way to do this, because we're going to have so much heartbreak as radicals, and I want my heart to not let me, every time it happens, I want to feel it so deeply that I'm going to still be there for the rest of my life, But that really struck me, that physiologically that's like happens, And it happened. My parents, I don't know why. I think I feel like I blame myself in a certain way too, because my mom and I became partner. Her partner, that her and my dad loved each other so tenderly from the very first. They wrote letters. They were in different towns when they met, and they separated. They had to go back almost instantly after the first date, and they started writing letters at night to each other. We have all their letters, so you can see instantly they were madly in love with it. It wasn't one of these stories you pretend. They started writing letters to each other a lot for the first month, so I can see they clearly were already deeply in love the minute they met, and they were deeply in love when they died. My dad couldn't talk for the last 9 months, and I had to facilitate. He could sort of spell out. It was all he was able to do, and I could see on their last anniversary he couldn't talk, and whether there's an ice storm or something, I couldn't even get her to the place where he was on life support, and I held the phone up. I got a nurse to hold the phone up to his ear, and my mom was doing a monologue to him, and I was just crying. I had to walk out of the room and not cry in front of her, because it was their anniversary, and it didn't mean anything to me, but they really wanted to be together, and they couldn't, and she was just basically telling him everything she would say at a funeral, but she said it to him, like, you've been the love of my life. We've had nothing but love. We've had so much bad things happen to us, but you and I never fought, it was, and I had to walk through. Walk down and go, I didn't want them to not be together on this day. I tried so hard and I couldn't do it, but it was so hard watching them do that. And he was on life support for 9 months, and she was pretty independent, but they spent almost all their time together, and suddenly she didn't have this partner in her life, and she had me, and I'd been her parent. I'd been my parents' parents their whole life, and through her, almost about a week before she died, she did this one thing for 5 minutes. It was the first time she'd ever been a mother to me, where she said, you always are thinking about everyone else, you're always being the parent. Why not for 1 minute you just think about what you need? And it's when I took a break from her. And she goes, take a break. And she goes, she goes, don't think about any. And I go, I can't do that. I'll become. And she goes, you will never become a person that just thinks about yourself. You're not struck. You've been like so socialized not to. Which in a way was her apology, because literally, I mean, from when I was born, they needed parents. They didn't need a kid.
Yeah.
And but it was her apology, and it was so healing for me. It was literally like a 2-minute thing. And so I took a break, and then she got sent to the hospital and started dying. But I also think me taking the break was like her second partner leaving her, because I had been, and she kept going, no, you're going to just leave me now because you don't have anyone to take care of, because we thought she was going to live a lot longer. And she thought she was going to live a lot longer. And I don't know, so, my own feelings of like, maybe I should have stayed, because I feel like I didn't recognize that her losing, I felt like, she's been able to cope so well with her partner being sick and dying, but she coped so well because she instantly had me become, and we did become partners. Like, in a way, we rethought our entire relationship with each other, not intellectually, just by practice, because we started leaning on each other in ways. Again, I was away from my anarchist milieu, and I had to do all sorts of different things to cope, and so did she. And it was so intimate, not in a sexual way. I can't explain it. So it really, again, reminds me that when we talk about love, we have such narrow understandings of it. I've never felt such an intensely loving partnership almost ever with a lover as I have with my mom, but it wasn't sexual. It's this way where we were so reciprocal for each other, including her helping me learn a different way to love and care.
You lived together or you had a relationship for so long
and
in your life.
So many poignant moments, like that moment I told you where, like I got to watch her every day lose something else, and her figuring out a way to cope with it. Like that anniversary, every day there was some new thing she couldn't do. She couldn't spend her anniversary with the person she wanted to. She spent it with me.
Yeah.
And but then when I left, it's not a blame, but I saw, like, when she really did think, she goes, oh, you're going to go back to your life. Why don't you just go take a break and check out your life? And she really thought I was going to just be like, I don't want to stay with my mom now. I don't know what I would have done, actually. Because she in a way, it was a beautiful thing for her to do. She goes, go back and stop thinking about me. She didn't. But I think she was scared I would leave her, But I can't blame myself, But she did die right after that.
Yeah.
So I'm part of her heartbreak. But she also gave me a gift that if I hadn't gone away, I never would have had. Where, so it's so complicated. These things become so complicated. Those moments where you're reciprocally caring for each other, you are doing reciprocity, and you can't know the consequences of that. So I don't feel guilty, but I feel poignant. That's a better word. But those poignant moments let us see more love than we ever saw. I don't know. It's not just a personal thing either. It has totally transformed, because I think politically I can say all these personal stories are poignant. Everyone who's had someone die close to them has 100,000 poignant stories that we should share with each other, and how we get our hearts through them. But it helped me also see, like, politically, my goodness, I have to do this politically, because this isn't disconnected from, And most people also do disconnect. They're like, oh, I just went and took care of. All of us anarchists have these moments. I went and just took care of my family, and I just segment that from my political life. And I'm like, I need to make my politics different too. I don't know. Yeah, the heart is such an incredible organ, like emotionally and mentally, and and even now while I'm talking, I can feel this part of my body hurting where my heart is. Like how we ignore that, because you can see I'm a talker, and my head is constantly racing, and I think of myself intellectually, and going through all this has made me think, oh no, I can. Therapists go, but take a minute, feel where in that body my heart is hurting.
Funny how we get told, or get taught to separate those things, or just ignore that one person you mentioned, being like, well, I can't. Or even people that are in the middle of doing relief work or whatever. I can't think about this. I can't. Yeah. Why are you bringing this up to me? Why are you trying to break me down? As if it's not a healthy thing for. It's difficult for you to give someone set someone's IV or do whatever else when your eyes are filled with tears.
Right. But it's okay. I mean, that story I was telling last night. A friend of mine, a nurse who got trained to separate out all the aspects of care. Change the IV, and then later in the day for 5 minutes, and then stop and do care for 5 minutes. And she was like, I can actually be caring while I'm doing the IV by explaining it to someone, explaining what you're doing, asking how they're feeling, looking at them, and actually just looking, listening to them tell a story. If they, I always do this every time I get my blood taken. I have really visual. You can see my vein, but it rolls, and it's really hard to get a needle into, and I know that it's really thin. So I'm really scared of needles because of that. I'd love to get a tattoo, but I'm scared of needles because every time they won't listen to me. They just start sticking. So when I was a kid, they would never listen to me, and it would 5 or 6 needles later, they finally got it into my arm, and I was like, why am I scared of needles? Because that's it. And so now I always go in and go, oh, before you put the needle in me, can I tell you a story? Like, I know this because you could use a thinner needle. I know that's what works, and I kind of have this fear. It's not irrational.
Yeah.
So
it's because people like you keep stabbing me.
But I say it in a way. And the last time I went, I got one of those ones that was like, didn't want to hear it. Didn't, she was like, I'm busy, and whatever. It's her, she's worn down by her job, blah blah, all the reasons. She didn't listen to me. 3 needles later, and I'm like, you could have waited 1 second to hear my story. Would have actually made it caring. But yeah, and the disaster story is saying to him, people are losing their houses, and we don't take a moment to listen to them talk about how it feels, or the fire, their volunteer. I just think, why don't we do it simultaneously? Just take a second to ask people how they are. And I keep thinking that we're scared to right now because we do so little of that. I don't think it's. Someone said last night, and I've forgotten. I thought it was so nice when they were saying all this loss becomes like a pressure as we push it in so much that when actually someone asks us, it blows up. And the person that happened to be the person to ask us is like, oh my God, I didn't sign up for like a year of doing therapeutic work for you, which is, I think, why we don't. Or when we decide to deal with it, it becomes so much more worse. Where suddenly we're now addicted to something, or we're now, there's so many other ways we cope with it that are not healthy that we now have to deal with a bunch of other things. So I liked when they were talking last night about it being pressurized. I thought that was really a good way. But I think if we took the pressure out of it, and we just actually
regularized the practice
just listening, like, how are you doing? I'm doing kind of crappy. Wow, that's really hard. It wouldn't even be a big deal, and most people don't necessarily every single time need to tell you. I don't know, it would become really, really different. Or just acknowledging, like, even I was in Bloomington, Indiana, and they have a beautiful space called Boxcar Books, which closed last year at New Year's. And I walked by the space, and there's a beautiful, they have a really cool sign. It's still up front. I was like, what? I did a double take, like I thought I was seeing a ghost. I was like, wait, I thought they told me they closed it. I knew they closed it. And then I was like, oh, and I actually had, my friends were with me. They're like, well, you knew they closed it. I was like, but the sign's outside. And then I wanted to walk up to the window to look, and they go, it's empty. It's empty, Cindy. And I go, but I had to see for myself that it was empty. And I looked in for like a few minutes ago, and then I wanted to walk around the building, because it almost was to convince myself, but then it gave me empathy for them. And I'm like, wow, that must feel really intense. So I went up to one of them, and I was like, later, who I saw, and I go, wow, that sign must be really hard. Like, it must be really hard for you in your community. And I knew, and I hadn't thought to ask them, And it was just a 1-minute conversation. And they said, yeah, actually we've been trying to think what to do with that sign and how to mark the year. And it was a really short conversation, but I'm like, wow, that must be really hard for them. They go, yeah, actually, I think it has been really hard for all of us, and we actually haven't really thought about it. We didn't have a long conversation about it, but, I don't know. I just think we need to do that just more regularly, It didn't mean I had to take on the pain of dealing with how the folks that were the Boxcar Collective have been processing it, because they need to figure that out for themselves, not me. But, and maybe it was, I thought in hindsight, maybe it was kind of cool they let the sign out, because maybe they didn't need to just, a lot of my impulse I don't know, our impulse, I think, would be to like take the sign down and hide it, because we don't want to have to think about it, or not walk by that street anymore, or burn it. Any of those are appropriate actions. It's just like, let's have a conversation first about what we want to do that might be the best, and maybe leaving it up and actually has been really nice, because a year later they probably have a better answer to the question, because they said they've been talking about what they want to do on the year anniversary. So they might actually come up with something really, like a much more beautiful way that would be better for them than if they'd taken the sign down right away. And actually, for me, maybe it was good too, because I'm really sad that space closed, and really sad.
It was lovely. It was a really good space. Yeah. I never saw any presentations there, but it was a lot of good books.
And they had a bunch of heartbreak with it, and a bunch of dilemmas, and a bunch of things that made it almost close, or maybe why it had So I don't know. It's again, it would, maybe it's helping them process the whole of all the reasons, and maybe it shouldn't even be there anymore, but still having it there is helping them think about it. Yeah, but that was it was really, it's a really cool sign. Have you seen? Yeah, because they have a 3D boxcar belt over it. It was really cool. Anyway.
God, I haven't been to Bloomington in such a long time.
Yeah, and it does feel like different there without a space to go to. You kind of like go into town, and you're like, where do I always go? First place I go if I don't have a friend to see. Or if the friend is at the space, which is what happened last night, you go to we go to the spaces we know we'll find people, whatever that is, the bar that everyone hangs out, the punk show that everyone goes to,
the coffee shop,
wherever you can find like your people. And when those places are gone, like Like, that's enormous. Yeah.
Cindy, thank you so much for taking
the
time.
No, thank you so much. It was so nice talking to you.
Yeah,
And also
it's
just
been really
at
nice.
a human level and for like really we run into each other so well and never get chances to talk here and there over the years. So and thanks for all you're doing with bring out longer term conversations, because I think that's part of the work too. Instead of it being news, we become the anarchist CNN. Thank you for becoming a breath of fresh air where people have more expansive times to have conversations.
That's the hope. I mean, I get a lot out of it, so I personally enjoy it.
Airing first on Asheville FM, WSFM LP at 103.3 FM in Asheville, North Carolina. This is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions, comments, or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you're interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment of the show, you're free to do so. Just send us an email if you end up using any content. If you care to, you can send us letters at our new address, which is The Final Straw Radio, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina 28816. The show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop.